All right, great. And so what we're going to do in the study session is we'll first go over the expectations for the final exam, which are very similar to the expectations for the midterm exam, but it helps to go through these again. Sorry about that. Theo, quiet. And then we'll go ahead and we will take a look at the exam itself and go through the questions, okay, step by step. And that way, if you have any questions about the questions, you can, raise those as we're together. All right, so let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Ready? Okay. And so let's first look at our campus site. Okay, there it is. All right, let me see if I can pull this over. There we go. So hopefully you can see that pretty good. Let me narrow this in a little bit. And so if you go to the final exam information and studies session, you'll see the tips for how to do good on the exam. The exam questions are available now. They were ready they could be downloaded as of midnight last night. So if you haven't had a chance to go in and download the final exam question, go in, you can go ahead and take a look at them, but we'll look at them in the review session right now. And then as you know, the exam covers the second half of the semester. So from topic 7 to topic 12. If you want to bring in information from the first half of the semester, that's totally fine. It is a final exam, so you can pull upon everything that we've learned this semester, but the questions are derived from topic 7 through topic 12, okay? The exam's worth a lot. So it's worth 200 points, 20% of your overall grade. And so the good news is if you're like, maybe in between a grade, or let's say you're getting like a B-, if you do really good on the final, you can pull your grade up pretty significantly. And I'll also keep that in mind. Students who do well on the final, when I'm figuring out the final grades, usually I just go by, whatever the number you earned was, that's the grade you get. But if I see this real improvement on the final exam, I'll take that into consideration when I'm figuring out the final grade, okay? The exam should be, each question should be about the answer should be about 2 pages for a total of 8 pages. A little bit less is fine. A little bit more is fine. But I mean, if your total exam is 4 pages, it's probably not enough. You're going to want to go in and develop it a little bit more. Do keep in mind that I do want you to keep the questions from the exam in the exam itself. That way you have the question in front of you and it helps me when I'm grading to see the question. But the inclusion of those questions into the final document, that will not count against your final, page total. So, I mean, we're really talking about 8 pages of what you write. Don't worry if that, oh, hey, I added the questions and it's making the document a little bit longer. That should not matter. And then, just the best exams thing is the same from the midterm exam. Keep in mind, there's usually a lot of prompts within a question. There's questions within the question. So make sure that you answer all of the prompts because, people lose points if you just fail to answer one of the prompts. So keep that in mind. Double check your work to make sure, did I answer all the prompts? When it comes to the material that I'm hoping that you use for the exam, I'm looking for, let me admit somebody. A new student's coming. All right, hold on just for a sec. Hi, Sienna, can you hear me? Hi, Sienna, can you hear me?
Hi there. Yep.
Great. And I just wanted to let you know I'm recording this. Okay. So I wanted to let you know that just so you're aware. Okay.
Yeah.
And right now we're going over sort of tips for how to do well on the exam. And so going back to the point about the course material, I want you to pull upon all of the course material we've done in class for the second half. So what do I mean by that? in your exam, if you're only referencing lectures, that's not going to be good enough. You need to reference lectures and the textbook. If you're only referencing the textbook, that's not going to be good enough. Reference the lecture or articles, okay, that we've read. And so when I'm grading, I want you to demonstrate that you're sort of pulling upon the broad base of the different course materials we've used throughout this semester. For each question, you don't have to be like something from the textbook, from something from a lecture, something from an article. You don't need to do that. It's just taken as a whole. You should bring in, a variety of those course materials. And when it comes to external resources, don't use them, and unless it's like a contemporary example from a news article, right? So like if you're answering the question about the presidency and you read something about President Joe Biden and you wanted to add it as an example, that's totally fine. But like when defining terms like the difference between, expressed power and delegated power for the presidency, like don't look that up on the internet and then put down what you found on the internet. Just, all the materials for that answering those kinds of questions are found in the course materials. Okay. Make sure that you're proofread your answers, make sure that they are making sense and that they're sort of like following, the question that I'm asking you. Okay. This isn't your typical essay, like introduction, thesis, 3 supporting paragraphs, conclusion. You don't need to do that. You should really just answer the questions that I'm asking you. Okay. And use paragraphs. Students don't use paragraphs anymore. So make sure you're not just like having a big chunk of text, because it's hard for me to grade, but it also defines the points that you're trying to make. So it's easier for me to follow what you're saying. It shows there the expectations regarding citation. And so just do in-text citations unless you're using external resources, which you probably shouldn't be doing anyways. You can just, do the citations right within your question or right within your answer. And then just use parentheses. So like if you're making reference to a point made in the textbook, we the people, and then put the page number, or just if you're making reference to a point made in a lecture, topic 9, lecture 1. Okay. And so just sort of, nothing fancy, and you don't need a works cited page. Do note that if you're using verbatim from the textbook or verbatim for the lecture, put it in quotation marks. Okay. Because if you don't, that would be considered plagiarism. And then the exam is due Saturday at 11:59 p.m. uploaded to the campus. So you have some time to work on it. Today's Wednesday. So you've got the rest of the day today, Thursday, Friday, and all day Saturday. So, I mean, if you want to upload it earlier, that's great. But if you can't start working on it until like Thursday, you still, you should be fine. Okay. So that's the expectations. They were very similar to the expectations for the midterm exam. Do you guys have any questions about what I'm looking for in terms of just the general guidelines for how you should be completing the exam? And I'm just going to go person by person. Huck, do you have any questions?
No, Professor. No.
Okay. Brianna?
No, I don't.
Sienna?
I just want to make sure. So if you're using the book, you said put like it would be "we the people" in quotations and then the page number.
So the only time you need to use quotations is if you are like actually including a sentence from the textbook that's like verbatim. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
adding quotations. But if it's just sort of, like implied, like an idea,
Okay.
You'll still want to then parentheses and the page number that you got it from.
Got it. Sorry.
No need to apologize. That's a good question.
That's why I was confused.
Right. And I probably was talking too fast, as I have a proclivity to do. All right, let's change gears and we'll bring up the questions. And like I said, these are already available for you to download. And so, but I don't expect that you've already taken a look at them because I know y'all are busy people. But what we'll do is we'll just go over each of the questions, and after each question, I'll ask if you have any questions about the question. Okay. The exams were 200 points. There's 6 questions on the exam. You choose your 4 that you'd like to do. And so that means that each question is worth 50 points. Okay. So again, it's worth a pretty substantial portion of your grade. So that gives you an opportunity if you to improve. If you do well on the final, yeah, that's a good thing. I always remind students when you download the exam, make sure you save it to your desktop, a zip drive, or a hard drive. A lot of students were like, they're like, oh, I forgot to save it. And then they upload it and they lose a lot of work. So just make sure that you're saving it. I know you know to do that, but it doesn't help to sort of like remind you to do that. And then since this is the final exam, I ask students whether they want comments on their final exam. It's not my first trip to the rodeo. And I know for final exams, a lot of students just look at their grade and they don't actually look at the document with the comments. And so I ask students whether they actually want comments for their final exam performance. So that gives me an idea whether they're actually gonna like look at the comments. So if you want me to make comments, I'm more than happy to do so. I love making comments, but I also don't want to make comments that nobody's ever going to read. But if you want comments, just put, when you upload your exam, just put in the comment box, yes, I would like comments, you know, and then that should be good enough. Okay. And if you forget to do it, you can just drop me an email or you can just drop me a text to remind me to do that. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, let's go over the questions and we'll, like I said, we'll go one by one. Hold on, my husband just got home and so you might hear a little barking in the background, but I'll get him to quiet the dog down in a sec. Okay, so the first question has to do with the presidency. And the question is that, hold on just for a sec. So the first question is that the Constitution grants many different powers to the president. And we talked about this both in both lectures for the presidency. So first explain, there's 4 kinds of powers that the textbook talks about and that I talked about in lecture. So I want you to explain the difference between the expressed powers, the implied powers, the inherent powers, and the delegated powers of the presidency. Okay. So, you know, the first question is just basically, hey, the Constitution gives the president powers. Explain to me the difference between those 4 categories of power. Hint, best answers will give an example. Okay. And so, you know, that when you talk about the inherent powers, I gave examples in the textbook, give it examples of that. I gave it in my lecture, throw an example in there. And it doesn't have to be from lecture or the textbook. I mean, you might have thought about on your own, like an example of a president that you've been following and an example of their an inherent power. Okay. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, I just want you to look at the expressed powers of the presidency. And those are the expressed powers are the ones that are explicitly stated in the Constitution. So for example, the second lecture for the presidency talks about how the president wears all these different hats. They wear like the diplomatic hat, they wear the commander-in-chief hat, they wear the judicial hat, okay? They wear the legislative hat. Those are the express powers. And so the express powers are like that the president, you know, has the power to, is the commander-in-chief, right? The president has the power to veto, right? The president has the power to grant pardons and reprieves. Those are all examples of express powers. So for this part of the question, I want you to pick 2 expressed powers that you think are that you consider to be the most essential powers to a successful presidency. There's no right or wrong answer there, okay? But when looking at the express powers, and if you are the president and you wanted to be successful in terms of your job description, which 2 powers would you select that you think are essential, and explain to me why, okay? And then on the flip side, I want you to identify 1 expressed power that you could maybe do without. It's like, you know what, I could be a really successful president, but I don't really need that expressed power. I could, if it wasn't in the Constitution, I still think the president could do a pretty good job, okay? Again, no right or wrong answer, but well, I guess it's right, it's wrong if you select a non-expressed power, okay? So you have to have an expressed power that's actually in the Constitution. But which one you choose, there's no right or wrong answer. It's how you best sort of explain why you think that's essential or why you think it's not essential. Okay. All right, so that's question one, and I'll go person by person, see if you have any questions about that. Huck, do you have any questions about that first question?
For that 4 powers that you talked about, the express power, implied, inherent, and delegate powers, you said the difference. So the difference is actually their definition of the power is, right?
Yeah,
So-
yeah, exactly.
So,
Right.
okay. So definition
so-
itself, a difference between the power
Exactly.
or a definite. Okay.
Right. So for example, like, and this isn't giving away too much, but it's sort of like the express powers is defined as the powers that are actually enumerated or written in the Constitution, right? It like says the president has the power to veto. It's actually in the Constitution. Oh, Alexa's answering my question. Alexa, stop. Oh my God. The inherent powers are different, right? They're not actually in the Constitution, but they're sort of derived from the powers, right? So I won't tell you what the inherent is, right? But it's defined in the textbook, right? And so that's how you would, I mean, you could basically, in your own words, define those 4 categories. And in doing that, you're sort of talking about what the differences are between them.
Okay. And then once I answer those and I pick up the only express power, and then in express power, I explain which 2 of the most powers that I like
Yes.
for a successful presidency. And then once I answer that, then I come up to in the same thing, right? In express power, which take one that I think I can do it better or still do it good without that power.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. So
And
that's itself a question. Okay.
Yeah. And make sure explain to me why. So don't say like, I need the commander in chief power and I need the veto power and I don't need, whatever power you select. Explain to me why.
Yeah.
So explain the power, but also tell me why it's essential or why it's not as essential.
Great. Thank you.
Question. Brianna or Sienna, any questions?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you.
No, I don't have any questions. I think I just understood from the last question that he asked.
Excellent. Okay. The second question has to do with the concept of judicial review. And so first, I'm asking you to explain the concept of judicial review as it relates to the Supreme Court. So just start at the basics, explain it, and don't just give me the definition from the textbook. Like explain it in your own words. Like you can start with the definition from the textbook, but you need to expand on that because, if you just tell me the definition in the textbook, I can't actually assess whether or not you understand the concept of judicial review. And then identify the Supreme Court case that establishes judicial review and briefly describe the facts of that case and the decision. That's in lecture topic 8, lecture 2. And hint, it has to do with Marbury, William Marbury. And so you'll want to briefly describe the facts of the case and the decision and why Marbury versus Madison. Okay, I just said what it is, why that's important to judicial review, concept of that. And then the textbook provides several categories of judicial review in action. Okay, so the textbook talks about what judicial review is and where it comes from. And then it says, this is how the Supreme Court has used judicial review. Okay. And so explain the way the Supreme Court exercises judicial review at the federal level and at the state level. And that's in your textbook. It says judicial review at acts of Congress, judicial review at the state level. Then it says judicial review of federal agencies. Okay, so that's if you're looking at that right now and you're like, "Whoa, I don't remember that." It's in the textbook, and I also reference it in the lecture. And so that explain the way the Supreme Court exercises judicial review at the federal and state level, making sure to identify specific examples in your answer. Okay, there's many examples that give, both that I gave in lecture and in the textbook, about how the Supreme Court exercises it at the federal and state level. And then finally, I want you to just evaluate the concept of judicial review. As you remember from lecture, judicial review is not actually in the Constitution. It was created by the first Supreme Court of the United States, the John Marshall Court. So it's basically an inherent power that John Marshall, in the Supreme Court, they kind of created judicial review. And so I want you to evaluate and assess judicial review. In what way is judicial review beneficial to democratic governance? And in what ways is it detrimental? Okay. And we talked about that in lecture as well, and they talk about it in the textbook. And on the whole, do you think that we're better off with judicial review? In other words, are you glad that the Supreme Court can nullify the decisions of the federal legislature or the state legislatures? Is it more beneficial or detrimental to democratic government? Explain. Okay. So that's, the judicial review question. I'll go from the bottom up this time. Sienna, do you have any questions about the judicial review question?
No, but I do have a question about the last one I was thinking about. Why
Yeah.
is the president given the power to pardon people?
Why?
Yeah, why in general was he given that?
Yeah. And so in lecture and in the textbook, we talk about how, there's two main reasons.
Okay.
One reason is that sometimes the court system gets it wrong.
Okay,
And it's very possible that, and the pardon power only applies to the actions of the national legislature, the Congress, and the federal courts. So it's
crimes,
very
right?
possible that maybe the US Congress passes a federal law that's wrong, unconstitutional, but maybe the Supreme Court's like, we don't care that it's unconstitutional, but we want to punish people. And so we're gonna say that law is actually constitutional. And then let's say somebody gets prosecuted by that law and it's unjust and it's wrong. That the Supreme Court wanted the president to have that final say, to basically right injustices. They really trust that the person who would be the president of the United States had the characteristics necessary to make that kind of judgment. Another reason is that pardons can release tensions in the United States. When there's conflicts brewing, like that's between groups, sometimes it's just better to pardon someone and move on. That's what Ford did with Nixon. Nixon was so divisive. He's just like, you know what? I'm going to pardon Nixon so we can heal as a nation. And so those are the two reasons that the pardon power is there.
Okay.
But that's a good question, because it can help you evaluate whether or not that's a really important power of the presidency or not. The framers thought that it was, but could a president still do their job if they don't have that?
Well, sometimes I think presidents maybe overstep on it too,
Right. And there's
No?
no oversight. Presidents can pardon whoever the F they want. I mean, there's no oversight. There's a protocol that you're supposed to follow, but they don't have to follow it. And so again, it kind of speaks to the trust that the framers had in the individual who would rise to the most significant office in the land. And who knows, maybe if they came back, they might be like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Or the people correct that. The people correct that and say that we want a president that has those characteristics to actually do what's good for the nation and not just their own individual party or interests. So back to the judicial review question. Brianna, do you have any questions, or Hawk, do you have any questions or clarifications on that?
No, not on the number 2 question, no.
Okay, Brianna?
No.
Okay, cool. Number 3 has to do with political ideology for the most part. And so first I want you to explain the difference or define political values and political ideology. Okay, so you can start with the definitions in the textbook, and then you can expand out from there, putting it in your own words. And then explain sort of the relationship between these two concepts. How are political values and political ideologies similar, and how are they different? Because there are some pretty big differences between what a political value is and what a political ideology is. But they're related to each other. You really can't have a political ideology without political values. So you're going to want to talk about that relationship. Okay. And then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to dig in on the two main or dominant ideologies in the United States: liberalism and conservatism. Okay. And so just it says describe the main characteristics and values that define the two dominant ideologies in the United States, liberalism and conservatism. You're going to want to make sure that you pull upon the lecture that I gave on that, but also the textbook. Okay. Because my lecture was very tailored to like human nature, like the proper role of government. But the textbook has like a broader and maybe a more like contemporary understanding of ideology. So pull upon both of them. What are the main differences between liberalism and conservatism in terms of their emphasis on core American values, liberty, equality, and democracy? And then finally, I want you to evaluate conservatism and liberalism. Points to consider: what aspects of conservatism do you most agree with? And which aspects do you least agree with? And what aspects of liberalism do you most agree with? And which aspects do you least agree with? And then make sure to develop your evaluation and provide specific examples as needed. I kind of, first when I wrote that question, I was like, if you're a liberal, tell me what's good about conservatism and what's bad about it. And if you're a conservative, tell me what's good about liberalism and what's bad about it, right? But then I thought, nobody wants to tell me what their ideology is. So I just was sort of like, do each of the, find the benefits and the drawbacks of each of those perspectives. Briona, we'll start with you. Any questions about the ideology question?
No, I do not.
Huck?
Okay, when I'm defining the political values and political ideology, is the definition, do I need to give up an example as well, or just definition would do it?
I think for political values, you might want to give an example, because I mean, you could for political ideologies, but like liberalism and conservatism are ideologies. So it's almost like the examples are embedded in the question itself. But there's other political ideologies that you could say blank is an example. But if you did liberalism as an example of political ideologies, you wouldn't lose points for that. But I'm not sure that it's necessary to get the full points. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Okay.
And other questions?
I think everything is okay. Looks good.
Sienna?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Number 4 is about a quote from Thomas Jefferson. And so it says that the basis of our government being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. And were it left to me, says Jefferson, to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. Okay. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to explain the message Jefferson's trying to communicate in this quote. And just because of the nature of this question, I can't really tell you what he's saying. Okay. If you have a question about what he's saying, I can't really answer that, right? Because I want you to sort of like figure it out. So explain the message that Jefferson is trying to communicate in this quote. Why does Jefferson consider government without newspaper to be such a problem? And when he uses the word newspaper, you can substitute that just for news media, right? Because in Jefferson's time, they just had the newspaper, right? They didn't have radio broadcasts, etc. So why does Jefferson consider government without newspapers such a problem? And how does this sentiment that Jefferson is communicating relate to the role the news media should play in a democracy as discussed in the topic 10 lecture 1? And so in topic 10 lecture 1, it's like there's 3 main roles that the news media play in democracy. So I want you to say, how does what Jefferson's saying relate to the role that the news media should play in a democracy? And then finally, if Jefferson were to return today to 21st century news media America, do you think he would still make this statement? Why or why not? And there's no right or wrong answer to that question. It's just based on the sort of what we've talked about in lecture about the problems with the news media, what they talked about it in the textbook, and also you read that piece about social media as well, the dark psychology of social media and how a lot of people get their news through that. Okay, just kind of a fun question, but it's not the easiest question to answer. And I'll just ask all three of you, any questions?
No, I have no questions.
Okay.
But she don't have enough, she don't have a lot of information, but I'm
Hawk?
Thank
Yes,
you.
I have a question.
Yes.
The message that Thomas Jefferson is communicating in his saying, did you talk about this in your lecture?
I can't remember whether I did or not. I think it's mentioned in the textbook. I don't know if I actually like referenced that quote. I'd have to go back and look at the lecture. Even though I only made that a couple of weeks ago, the life of me, I can't remember.
Okay. Any idea what topic was that? I
Oh,
can
it's-
probably look up later. but
It's topic 10.
topic 10. Okay.
And then the chapter is the chapter on media and politics. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what chapter that is, but it's listed in topic 10. I don't know if it's might be chapter 6, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. All right.
All right. All right, let's move on to question 5 and 6. These are a little bit easier questions. So 5 is about voter turnout. So explain the concept of voter turnout and describe trends in voter turnout over time in the United States. And we talked about that in lecture, and your textbook talks about that as well. Describe some of the factors that influence the rate of voter turnout. We talked about that in lecture, and they talk about that in the textbook. And why do voting rates in the United States lag significantly behind those in most developed countries? In lecture and in textbook, we looked at like how voter turnout in the United States is a lot lower than in other countries, but there's some reasons for that. And then in lecture and in the textbook, we talked about reforms that could be pursued in the United States, such as same-day registration or convenience voting, like mail-in voting. So what reforms might be pursued in the United States to increase voter turnout? And do you think, and so that one, your textbook says these are reforms that could help increase voter turnout. But then I'm asking you, do you think that these reforms should be implemented in an effort to increase voter turnout in the United States? So it's kind of asking you, do you think it's better when more people vote, right? Some people might say, no, people aren't informed and they don't care about elections. Why should we make it easier for them to vote? But the others might say people are informed, but they're just really busy. And if we make voting easier, then the more the voice of the people will be heard. Okay. So that's a kind of a broad question about voter turnout. Sienna, do you have a question about that?
What chapter in the book was that on? Do you know?
Yeah, let me bring up.
I remember doing it. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
We did it.
So I think it's topic 11, but here I'm scrolling down on the Canvas site. So topic 10 is the media. And so to
Okay.
answer your, well, it's not in that one. This goes back to Hawk. That's chapter 7. Remember you were talking about, is that quote? So that's chapter 7. The voting is topic 11.
Okay.
So voting and political participation, that's topic 11. And that chapter is chapter 8.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And then since the last one is on voting criteria, that's the one we just got done with. And that is
10
is that 10? Okay.
chapter, right? I'm not sure the topic number though.
Chapter 10. That's correct. Because I think we skipped the chapter on interest groups. So that's a pretty straightforward question. And then the last question is like straight out of what you just were doing on our last topic. So there are different criteria for winning an election. Majority vote, got to have the majority, 50% plus 1, plurality vote, the person who gets the most wins, and proportional vote, PR. Explain each of these criteria, describing the strengths and weaknesses of each criteria, which we did in lecture, and they also talk about it in the textbook. And of the 3 of these, which do you think is the best criteria for winning an election to a national legislative body like the United States Congress? And explain your answer. Okay. So in this, it should be pretty straightforward to explain and give examples of the majority vote, plurality vote, and proportional vote method. describing the strengths and weaknesses should also be pretty straightforward. However, that question about which do you think is the best criteria, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but that's where you bring your critical thinking to the question. And make sure that you're talking about electing Congress, not the state legislature, not the president of the United States. But if we were going to elect people to Congress, right now we use plurality vote in most states. Should we stick with that? Or do you think would be better off as majority or proportional? Okay. Does that make sense? All right. So let me stop sharing the screen and bring us all back together. All right. So that's what you got yourself into. Yeah. Up for the challenge? Can't wait
Yes.
for- Okay. Excellent. All right. So unless you have any other questions, I just want to let you know that where we are in terms of grading for the class. At this point, I finished grading everything for our class up to this point, except for the CIA paper, which you guys submitted last night. So you should look at the grade book. You have a pretty good sense of what your grade is. My goal is to get all the CIA papers done before you turn in your final exam. And so by the end of the day on Saturday, the 18th, that stuff should be graded, hopefully. And then I tell my students that that I always shoot to have final grades done for classes by December 23rd. Hopefully that's the case this year. If it's not, I'll let you know. And then I usually, once they're posted to the Canvas, I tell students it's posted. I let people look at their grades and they have 24 hours to give me feedback, like angry feedback about their grade. But if I don't hear anything, then I post it to pause the following day on Christmas Eve on the 24th. Okay. So that's sort of what you should be looking for in terms of when you can get your final grade. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Oh, I'm also available. I teach all my classes online. So I'm available 24/7 for the most part, not really at 2 a.m, but don't hesitate to text me, call me, or send me an email, and I should be able to get you a prompt response. Okay.
Great. Great.
All right. That's it for me. And good luck with your finals, all your finals. And I will make a recording of this if you want to review it. Not that you probably need to, but all right. Thanks a lot for your hard work this semester. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Professor. Really nice seeing you. Thank you so
All right,
much.
you too. Bye-bye.